Are cartoons actually ugly now? It's rhetorical, don't worry, you don't need to answer. There will be a quiz at the end of the video though, so I hope you studied. Recently, I've been seeing a lot of discourse online, centered around the idea that the cartoons of today look way worse compared to the older ones. And I mean older ones in the most vague way possible. Because there's never really been a definitive era that people are unanimously referring to. Some are talking about the 80s, some the 90s, or the 2000s. There really is no consistent time frame. Now, this isn't exactly a new argument or anything. It's actually been a talking point for years, mainly circling back to this lame as hell template that can be so easily disproven through the fact that whoever made it literally had to draw the characters off model just so that it would fit their point. I don't know, dude, they might actually be onto something. I tuned into Family Guy last night and look what they've done! What makes this current discussion different, however, is that it's not simply about how all cartoons today look the same, but instead that they're all ugly. You may be asking yourself where this has come from, and if you give me a second, I can show you. Jeez. Recently, a video was uploaded by a guy called Scott Kramer titled "Cartoons Are So Ugly Now," where he discusses why cartoons are so ugly now, who would have guessed? And I saw a bunch of people on Twitter trying to argue about why this guy is wrong with his assessment, and more interestingly, how he has no right to even give his views on the topic, since he has no experience working in the industry. Or at the very least that his opinion doesn't hold very much weight because of this. And before we get into this, let me make it clear that I have nothing against this guy, and I have nothing against this person. I know nothing about either of them and have no intent to try to change their minds about this. They both just had an opinion on the internet, and I know to some that might as well be the end of the world, but I simply thought this was an interesting topic that I wanted to further discuss beyond the limited space of a tweet. I gotta say this because I'm well aware this video is gonna be posted around by people who haven't watched it, just because of the thumbnail and title. And if you see that, then please send them this part of the video. Hi, if you're hearing this, you tweeted before watching the video. Nothing to say, just wanted to point it out, okay, bye. Subscribe, by the way, let's get to 500k. That's what you're meant to say here, right? Is it true, though? Is there any merit to what this guy has to say? Because, spoiler warning, there actually is. And I think to dismiss this by saying he has no experience does nothing but immediately shut down any kind of discussion. I think ultimately we gotta remember, cartoons are made for a general audience. So if a general audience, like Scott, thinks your cartoon looks ugly, then that's not to be brushed off or overlooked. So let's get into the topic of cartoons being uglier now, and find out what the truth actually is. Now let's begin this discussion by first going over Scott's video, to see what examples he used, why he believes they're ugly, and why the cartoons of yesteryear were better. When I hear what was said about the video itself, it makes me question if anyone actually watched it, because I did, and the guy really doesn't say anything that controversial. If anything, I could sum up the video with 2 points. 1, the title is very hyperbolic and not true at all, and 2, the video itself? Yeah, I agree with him on what he says about the cartoons he discusses for the most part. Bar 1 or 2 points that simply come from him, like he said, not knowing much about animation. The first minute of the video was just the guy clarifying that he has no knowledge of being in the animation industry, and that everything he's about to say is his own opinion. And then he goes on to talk about 3 recent cartoons: SpongeBob's Camp Coral, the recent CGI Rugrats reboot, and the live-action Fairly OddParents. And I think he's completely justified in the opinion he has. His main point about Camp Coral is that visually it's a mess and doesn't hold a candle to the original show, which in and of itself got way more stiff and saturated over time. And while I certainly don't agree with his idea that the more dull colors of the earlier seasons were intentional, you know, it was simply a mastering issue when translating the hand-drawn cells to computers, which is why the later ones are way more bright, you know, cuts out the middleman. But I believe he's absolutely correct. Camp Coral doesn't look appealing. I touched on it in my own video about the show, but they're desperately trying to achieve the look of expressive 2D storyboards on a TV CGI budget, which causes a lot of the faces to come off like nightmare fuel. A commendable effort on the animators for sure, but just wasn't achieved in the way I'm sure they would have envisioned due to the restrictions. This isn't to mention how inconsistent the lighting looks. Some shots look gorgeous while others appear unfinished, with the shading being this dull and drab gray that makes everything appear way darker than it should be and looks, you know, ugly.
How long have I been ugly, Patrick?
As long as I can remember.
And what can I say about Fairly Otter that isn't already apparent from just showing you a screenshot? The big one he mainly focuses on in the video is the Rugrats reboot, and this is where I think the discussion gets interesting, because as I'm sure we all know, the original Rugrats wasn't exactly a looker either. And this is where you start to realize that the blanket term of ugly is way too broad to be applied to an entire medium. It's like me saying live-action movies are ugly. Because the old 90s Rugrats and the new CGI Rugrats are ugly in 2 entirely different ways. The old Rugrats always felt intentionally unsettling and gross. That was sort of the style back then. Especially with Klasky Chupo. I mean, have you seen As Told by Ginger? Gross, don't put that on the screen. In regards to the animation itself, it actually looks quite nice. At the very least, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Babies are disgusting creatures, so it makes sense why they'd be presented that way in a cartoon about them. Whereas in the Rugrats reboot, it's the opposite, where it looks ugly in an unintentional way. There are definitely things worth praising, like I was surprised at how good the textures were in it, but being made by Nickelodeon, like Camp Coral, it's mainly the same issue. Boring dark lighting that makes everything really unappealing. Except unlike Camp Coral, it doesn't even have the expressive visuals to make up for it, with the models looking way more restrictive. See, I often see this excuse that 90s cartoons were ugly too. And while that's definitely true, I also think there's a major difference between art style problems and technical issues. The video ends with Scott saying it ultimately doesn't matter since he's not a kid and doesn't watch cartoons, that he doesn't fault the animators at all for any of this, and that he likes the way the Blue's Clues reboot looks. Wait, why were people pissed about this video again? The biggest thing I have against this video is that it comes off incredibly cherry-picked. Like, you can't have the title "Cartoons Are So Ugly Now" and only talk about 3 Nickelodeon reboots. A more accurate title would have been something like "Nick Reboots Are So Ugly" or "Stop Rebooting Classic Cartoons." I don't fucking know. Being a YouTuber as well, I understand that there is some element of the game, you know, flashy titles and thumbnails, but I can see why at first glance people wouldn't be as likely to hear out what you have to say. But saying all that, like I mentioned before, I also don't agree at all with this mentality some have, that his opinion on these specific shows hold any less weight just because he isn't in the industry. And again, this isn't specifically about the person who made the tweet, I'm more so referring to the people who see something like this and immediately go to the guy's video to give him shit for shitting on artists' hard work. I got a little newsflash for you, buddy. Everything that was ever created on God's green earth had work put into it by somebody. And to say that you're not allowed to point that out because of it is it's just dumb to me, because where's the line? Is it only limited to animators at that point? Where does it stop? Can I say you're not allowed to shit on Scott's video because he put hard work into it? Doesn't make sense. If I pay someone to clean my bathroom and they proceed to dip their mop in red paint and smear it around the walls, am I not allowed to vocalize my displeasement with that because they say they worked hard on it? An exaggeration for sure, but I'm more so using it to pose the question of what's okay to shit on and what isn't. I never see these complaints for a show like Family Guy or Big Mouth or The Prince. People shit on those all the time, and I don't recall ever seeing somebody come out like, hey, you shouldn't be allowed to say that because people worked hard on those. I only ever see this point being made when it's about a property that is widely enjoyed like SpongeBob or Rugrats. I'm just wondering if these people have ever watched a show or seen a movie and been like, wow, that sucked. Or if they just enjoy everything because somebody worked on it. It seems like such a non-constructive way to view media that helps no one. And if you want to just sit and enjoy silly little cartoons and not think about any of that stuff, then that's fine, genuinely. But why aren't others allowed to have the discussion? Riddle me this, Batman. Am I seriously not allowed to look at a show like The Problem Solvers and say it's ugly? That's not even to comment on the fact that these shows looking the way they do has nothing to do with the animators, and even Scott himself acknowledges this, pointing out how it's all in the executives wanting to make money or being so out of touch as to what people actually want. Me saying that the Rugrats reboot looks ugly says nothing about the animation team and says everything about the time and budget they were probably restricted to while working on it. I don't understand why it also has to be a personal attack. I seriously think there are people out there who believe that if I were talking to someone in real life and they were like, oh yeah, I worked on Camp Coral, that I'd immediately be like, that show's terrible. You worked on that? It's shit, you know. Let me sit you down and I can lecture you on why you're not doing your job right. Again, this may seem like an exaggeration, but I genuinely see people online act like this is the case. If anything, the excuse of people working hard on it only ever comes off like an insult to me. Like I'm a baby who can't handle saying anything negative on the internet. I'm not animating on Camp Coral simply for the joy of creation, I'm doing it because it's a job and I get paid to do it. Now, working on something for money and having care for it aren't mutually exclusive, but I see people act like the folks working on a show like this are doing it out of pure passion, and not because, well, it's a job. A creative job, but a job nonetheless. At the end of the day, I get it. It's not nice to work on something or have a friend work on something and have it be shit upon release. But at a certain point, you have to consider that it's not a personal attack and somebody's just giving their opinion, even if you disagree with their right to say it. And this all brings us back to the question I posed at the start of the video. Are cartoons ugly now? And the answer is... well, of course some of them are, but ugly cartoons have always existed. And to generalize the entire medium based on the examples where it's clear it's a cause of executive meddling and greed, not only gives a bad name to the shows who have an intentionally ugly style that adds to the vibe and charm, but also is to ignore all the fantastic looking shows that are currently airing. dickhead. You may think that was a whole lot of hoopla just to get to a point that can be summed up in a paragraph, but ultimately that wasn't really the point of all this. It was never a discussion of whether or not cartoons were actually ugly now, and more so a jumping ground for how folks handle media criticism nowadays. Weird video. I'm aware it's not my usual style to focus an entire video based on recent minor animation community discourse. Shh, that didn't happen. But I don't know, I felt like it would be a fun topic to talk about and discuss. And let me know what your stance on the matter here is. Maybe I'm just an idiot, who knows? But either way, no harm to Scott, no harm to the person who made the tweet. Just a fun little discussion, and I hope you have something to take away from it. Alright, now finally all that's left to do is pull out your textbooks and get ready for the quiz. Oh, what's that? You didn't bring your textbook with you? I warned you at the start of the video this was coming up. Can you tell me what were the 4 shows that Scott mentioned in his original video? Oh, you weren't listening? You know I'm gonna have to call your parents about this. This is just roleplay at this point.